You know how sometimes you just find yourself looking up, watching the clouds drift by, maybe seeing shapes like, I don't know, a dragon or something?
Yeah, everyone does that. It's pretty universal.
Right. But have you ever really stopped to think, what are they? Beyond just, fluffy stuff in the sky? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. Clouds, something you see every single day, but maybe haven't fully explored.
That's right. And we've got a fantastic stack of info for you. Everything from the basic science, how they form, how we classify them, right through to cultural interpretations, and their huge role in climate. Our mission really is to unpack the most important bits, give you those aha moments, and help you get genuinely well-informed about these atmospheric wonders, without drowning you in details.
Exactly. We'll cover how they actually come into being, how scientists sort them all out, their massive impact on Earth, and even like what ancient people thought about them or what clouds look like on Mars or Jupiter. It's quite the range. Okay, let's get into it. Unpack this.
So starting with the basics. In meteorology, a cloud is essentially a visible mass. It's made of tiny liquid droplets or frozen crystals or sometimes other particles just suspended up there in the atmosphere.
Suspended in a planetary body's atmosphere, you mean?
Right, exactly. On Earth, it's usually water or ice, but elsewhere, could be other chemicals entirely.
So it's tangible, not just empty air, visible enough to see to block the sun.
Precisely. And here on Earth, they mostly form in one of two ways. The big one is when air cools down to its dew point.
Dew point. That's when it can't hold any more water vapor,
Yeah, right. It's saturated.
Exactly. And the main way it cools is through something called adiabatic cooling.
Okay, adiabatic, how does that work?
It's simpler than it sounds. Think about air rising. As it goes higher, the pressure drops.
Right.
So the air expands. And when a gas expands, it cools down.
Ah, okay. Like letting air out of a tire, it feels cold.
Kind of like that, yeah. So warm, moist air rises, expands, cools, and boom. If it cools enough to hit that dew point, you get condensation, clouds. And something usually makes the air rise, these lifting agents.
Yes, exactly. There are a few key ways air gets lifted. The most straightforward is convective lift. That's just the sun heating the ground, the warm air becomes buoyant and rises. That gives you those puffy cumulus clouds.
Okay, the classic cotton ball clouds.
Then you have frontal or cyclonic lift. This is air being forced upwards at weather fronts, where different air masses meet, or around low-pressure areas where air converges and has to go up.
So that creates different types of clouds depending on the front.
Right. Warm fronts often give you widespread, layered clouds, cirriform, stratiform. Cold fronts tend to push air up more vigorously, creating narrower bands of more dramatic clouds like cumulonimbus.
And the third one, mountains.
Or graphic lift, yeah. Wind hits a barrier like a mountain range, and the air is forced upwards. That's where you can get those cool lenticular clouds, the lens-shaped ones, or even trigger thunderstorms if the air is unstable enough.
So these invisible forces are constantly shaping the sky, and you mentioned particles.
Ah, yes. Crucial point. Condensation doesn't just happen anywhere. It typically needs a surface. In the air, these are tiny things called cloud condensation nuclei.
Like what? Dust?
Salt, exactly. Dust, salt from the ocean, pollen, even pollution particles. They're small enough to stay suspended, and they give the water vapor something to condense onto.
Right. So no dust, maybe no clouds?
It's much harder, yeah. Much higher humidity. And this lifting can go really high. Sometimes water vapor gets pushed way up past the troposphere, maybe by atmospheric wave, and forms clouds in the stratosphere or even mesosphere.
Okay, so cooling is one way to get saturation. What's the other main way?
You can also reach saturation simply by adding more moisture to the air, even if the temperature doesn't drop much.
How does that happen?
Think about evaporation from lakes, oceans, rivers, even wet ground after rain, or plants releasing water vapor that's transpiration, or sometimes rain falling from higher up evaporates on the way down, adding moisture to the air below. Virga, they call that.
And what about fog then? Is that just a low cloud?
Essentially, yes. Fog is a great example of the air reaching saturation without significant lifting. It's usually caused by non-adiabatic cooling.
Meaning
The cooling happens through contact with a cold surface, that's conductive cooling, or the ground radiating heat away at night, radiational cooling, or even evaporative cooling. This happens right near the ground, so you get condensation at surface level. That's fog. Or mist, if visibility is a bit better.
Got it. Now, you mentioned classification earlier. How do scientists make sense of all the different cloud shapes and types we see? It seems like there's an endless variety.
There's a lot of variety,
Yeah.
but there's a really elegant system, actually. It's hierarchical.
Yeah.
Think of it like a family tree for clouds in the troposphere. That's our weather layer, closest to the ground.
A cloud family tree. I like that.
It starts with 5 basic physical forms that a cloud generally takes. Then you combine those forms with the altitude level, where they typically occur high, middle, or low. And that gives you 10 basic genera. Those are the main types, like cirrus or cumulus.
Okay, so 5 forms first. What are they?
All right, thinking about them generally from most stable air to least stable. First, you have stratiform. These are the flat, featureless, sheet-like clouds. Think overcast gray days. They form in very stable air.
Okay, sheet-like. Got it.
Then cirriform. These are the delicate, wispy ones, usually found very high up, made of ice crystals. Think thin, feathery streaks.
Like cirrus clouds.
Exactly. Third is stratocumuliform. This is sort of a mix, layers or patches that show some lumpiness, rolls, or ripples. It means there's some limited convection, some instability.
So not quite flat, not quite puffy.
Right. The cumuliform. These are your detached heap-like clouds, the cotton balls. They result from localized convection, rising thermals.
Fair weather clouds, usually.
Often, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, cumulonimbiform. These are the big ones. Towering, massive vertical development, often have that anvil shape at the top. Form in very unstable air. These are the thunderstorm clouds.
Okay, those 5 forms make sense visually. So how do they combine with altitude to give us the 10 main genera?
Right, let's break that down by level, starting high up. High-level clouds, these are way up there, 3,000 to maybe over 18,000 meters, depending on latitude. All ice crystals. You've got cirrus, those wispy streaks we mentioned.
Okay.
Cirrocumulus, CC, like a very high layer of tiny white ripples or grains, sometimes called a mackerel sky, can produce virga, that evaporating rain.
Mackerel sky, right.
And cirrostratus, CC cirrocranus, a thin, sort of whitish veil that often covers the whole sky and creates those halos around the sun or moon. Doesn't rain, but often means rain is coming.
Okay, high ice clouds. What about the middle level?
Mid-level clouds, found roughly between 2,000 and 7,600 meters. Often a mix of water droplets and ice crystals, especially at the colder end. 2 main types here, altocumulus and CC. These are patches or sheets, often grayish or whitish with waves or rounded masses. Bigger elements than cirrocumulus and some shading can also produce virga.
Like a slightly lower, lumpier version of cirrocumulus?
Kind of, yeah. And altostratus, A's. This is the grayish or bluish sheet, more uniform than altocumulus. Sometimes the sun looks like it's shining through ground glass. This one can produce light, steady rain or snow.
Okay, the watery sun cloud.
And then low-level.
Low-level clouds. Bases below 2,000 meters. Mostly water droplets, unless it's very cold, appear larger. We have stratocumulus, SC. These look like low, lumpy layers or patches, often with darker gray bases, bigger elements than altocumulus. Might produce very light drizzle.
So lumpier than stratus.
Right. Then stratus itself. This is the gray, featureless low layer, like fog that hasn't reached the ground. If it produces anything, it's just drizzle or maybe light snow grains.
And cumulus, you mentioned that earlier.
Yes, cumulus clouds usually have their bases in the low level. We're talking about the standard fair weather cumulus, small with flat bases. They don't usually precipitate.
Okay. That covers high, mid, and low. But some clouds seem to span multiple levels. Exactly. We categorize those based on their vertical development. There are 2 main groups here. First, moderate vertical development. The key one here is nimbus gratus, NS. This is your classic rain cloud. A thick, dark gray, often widespread layer. It typically forms from thickening altostratus. Its base lowers into the low level, but the top can reach high levels, produces steady rain or snow, often associated with warm fronts.
So nimbus gratus is officially mid-level, but acts multi-level.
The WMO classifies its base usually in the mid-level, yes, but functionally it occupies a large vertical slice. Also, slightly larger cumulus clouds, cumulus mediocris, have moderate vertical extent, but are still officially low-level clouds.
Okay, and the really big ones.
The towering vertical clouds. These are the ones pilots really watch out for. Bases in the low to mid-level, tops reaching way up high. There's cumulus congestus. These are like cumulus clouds on steroids. Much taller than they are wide, cauliflower-like tops. They can produce showers, sometimes called towering cumulus or TCU.
Getting bigger.
And the biggest of all, cumulonimbus, CB. Immense, heavy, towering masses. Dark bases, tops often spreading out into that anvil shape made of ice. These are the thunderstorm factories. Heavy downpours, lightning, hail, strong winds, tornadoes. The works.
Wow, that's a comprehensive list. You mentioned even more detail. Species and varieties. Like, give me an example that really stands out.
Oh, definitely. The system gets finer. Species, describe specific structures, often related to stability or wind shear. One really striking species is lenticularis.
Lenticular clouds, yes. Those smooth, lens-shaped ones.
Exactly. Often seen near mountains. They form in stable air flowing over terrain, creating standing waves. They look serene, but they can indicate really strong turbulence for aircraft. Sometimes they stack up like pancakes. Very distinctive.
They are amazing. Okay, so that's a species. What about other unique features or varieties?
Varieties describe patterns or opacity, like if a cloud layer is see-through, translucidus, or opaque, opacus, or arranged in waves, undulatus, or rose, radiatus. But then you have supplementary features, things attached to the main cloud. And this is where you get some spectacular sights. One of my favorites is mammatus.
Mammatus, those pouch-like things hanging underneath.
Precisely. Bubble-like protuberances, usually seen on the underside of a cumulonimbus anvil after a storm has passed its peak. They look dramatic, almost otherworldly. Don't necessarily mean severe weather is happening right then, but they're associated with strong storms.
They look incredible. What about clouds that look like breaking waves?
You're probably thinking of Fluctus or Kelvin-Helmholtz wave clouds. They're quite rare. They form when two layers of air are moving at different speeds, creating this beautiful shearing instability that looks exactly like ocean waves curling over. Really stunning.
And there's a newer one too, Asperitas.
Yes,
Yeah.
Asperitas. Recognized more recently, these look like the underside of a very rough sea. Chaotic, dark, undulating waves. Quite dramatic and a bit ominous looking.
And then there are clouds actually made by things on Earth, like fires or planes.
Absolutely. We have categories for those. Flammagenitus clouds born from intense heat, huge wildfires, volcanic eruptions. Some volcanic ones have reached incredible heights, like 57 kilometers.
Whoa!
And homogenitus clouds are human-made. The most common example, contrails from airplanes. If they persist and spread, they're classified as cirrus homogenitus. They can actually affect local temperature and sunshine.
Fascinating. So we've covered the troposphere pretty thoroughly, but you said clouds exist higher up and even on other planets.
We did, yeah, way beyond our everyday weather layer. And even looking down from high up, you can see amazing large-scale patterns, like vast stratocumulus fields over oceans, sometimes organized into these cells, cloudy centers with clear edges, or clear centers with cloudy edges. Open and closed cells.
Like a giant honeycomb pattern.
Sort of, yeah. And another cool pattern is vortex streets. These are swirls, eddies, formed downwind of obstacles like tall islands. Clouds like altocumulus get caught in these wind patterns called Kármán vortices, creating these amazing parallel rows that twist and turn. You see them in satellite photos sometimes.
Very cool. Okay, so let's go higher. Beyond the troposphere.
Right, up into the stratosphere, we find polar stratospheric clouds, or PSCs. These are typically way up 15 to 25 kilometers. Very cold, very little moisture up there, so they're mostly restricted to the polar regions in winter.
And they look different.
Yeah, they're not classified with the Latin system. There are two main types. Type 1 clouds are made of supercooled nitric acid and water. They look hazy, maybe like cirrostratus. Importantly, they play a role in ozone depletion.
Oh, okay.
And type 2 are the really beautiful ones called nacreous clouds or mother-of-pearl clouds. They're made of water ice crystals, very thin, and they shimmer with these incredible iridescent colors, often look wavy or lens-shaped, like high-altitude cirrus or lenticular clouds.
Mother of pearl sounds amazing, and even higher than that.
Even higher. Right near the top of the mesosphere, around 80 to 85 kilometers up. That's about 10 times higher than cirrus clouds. These are mesospheric clouds, or more commonly, noctilucent clouds.
Noctilucent. Night shining.
Exactly, because you only see them when the sun is well below the horizon for you on the ground, but it's still illuminating them way up high. They look like brilliant electric blue or silvery white wisps, almost like eerie cirrus clouds.
Wow, where do you see those?
Also mostly restricted to polar regions, mainly in summer. Interestingly, they seem to be becoming more frequent and brighter, which might be linked to climate change, possibly due to increased methane releasing water vapor way up high when it breaks down.
Okay.
They form on tiny particles, possibly from meteor smoke.
Meteor smoke. Okay, that's wild. And then beyond Earth, what are clouds like out there?
Oh, the variety is incredible. Venus is completely shrouded in thick clouds, but they're not water. They're sulfuric acid, multiple layers of stratiform clouds.
Sulfuric acid rain. Lovely.
Well, it probably evaporates before reaching the surface virga again. Mars has water ice clouds, thin ones, kind of like cirrus or cirrocumulus, mostly near the poles, and also ground fogs made of water ice.
So Mars has weather, sort of.
It does. And the gas giants. Jupiter and Saturn have spectacular cloud decks. An outer layer of ammonia ice clouds, looking cirriform. Below that, a layer of ammonium hydrosulfide clouds. And deeper still, clouds of water ice and liquid water, possibly including huge cumulonimbus thunderstorm clouds, especially near Jupiter's Great Red Spot.
Multiple layers of different chemicals.
Exactly. And Uranus and Neptune, the ice giants, their visible clouds are primarily methane ice. Saturn's moon Titan is fascinating, too. It has methane clouds, including cirrus and polar stratospheric types, as part of a whole methane cycle, like Earth's water cycle, but with methane rivers and lakes.
The methane cycle, wow. And even beyond our solar system.
Yeah, astronomers are detecting clouds on exoplanets. They found evidence of high-altitude, thick clouds on planets like Kepler-7b and GJ-1214b. It tells us clouds are probably a common feature of planetary atmospheres throughout the universe.
Okay, this is all fascinating stuff, but it brings up a big question. Why should you, listening right now, care so much about cloud details? It turns out they're not just pretty patterns, they have a huge impact.
A massive impact.
Yeah.
I mean, first, obviously, they're where precipitation comes from rain, snow, hail. Life depends on that.
Yeah.
But they also drive atmospheric circulation by releasing heat when water condenses, and they redistribute heat around the planet. And then there's their effect on climate, which is complicated. Clouds have a dual role.
Cooling and warming, right.
They have a cooling effect. Cloud tops, especially low and mid-level ones, are bright white. They reflect a lot of incoming sunlight back into space. This increases Earth's albedo, its reflectivity, and that cools the planet.
Okay, like a giant sunshade.
Pretty much. But then there's the warming effect. Clouds, being made of water and ice, are also very good at absorbing the heat radiation coming up from the Earth's surface, that infrared radiation. They then radiate some of that heat back down, trapping it like a blanket. This is similar to the greenhouse effect.
And different clouds do this differently.
Yes. High, thin ice clouds like cirrus are better at trapping heat than reflecting sunlight, so they tend to have a net warming effect. Low, thick clouds like stratocumulus are much better reflectors, so they have a strong cooling effect.
So what's the overall balance, cooling or warming?
Right now, based on measurements, NASA says the global cooling effect from clouds is larger than their warming effect. So overall, clouds currently cool the planet compared to if they weren't there.
Okay, that's significant. But what about the future, climate change?
That's the billion-dollar question, or maybe trillion-dollar. How clouds will respond to a warmer world and how those changes will further affect warming these cloud feedbacks are incredibly uncertain.
How so?
Well, warmer air can hold more moisture, which might mean more clouds, potentially increasing cooling. But warmer temperatures might also cause some clouds to evaporate, reducing the cooling effect. And the types of clouds might change, shifting the balance between warming and cooling.
So we don't really know which way it will go.
It's the single biggest source of uncertainty in climate models. Different models predict different cloud responses, leading to different projections of future warming. Understanding cloud feedbacks is absolutely critical for predicting future climate change accurately. It's a huge area of research.
Oh, okay. So clouds are crucial for climate, but let's not forget they're also just beautiful. The colors, the light.
Oh, absolutely. Their appearance tells us so much. Their brightness depends on how much light they reflect, scatter, and absorb. Thick clouds reflect most sunlight hitting them, hence the brilliant white tops. The bases look darker simply because less light gets through.
And the colors at sunrise and sunset.
That's all about the light scattering. Sunlight has to pass through more atmosphere at dawn and dusk, scattering away the blues and greens, leaving the reds, oranges, and pinks to illuminate the clouds. Beautiful effect.
What about weird colors, like green clouds?
Yeah, greenish or sometimes bluish tint in a really big cumulonimbus cloud usually means there's a lot of water and potentially hail within it. The ice and water scatter light in a particular way. It's often seen with severe thunderstorms, indicating a very deep, wet storm with a strong updraft, but it's not like a direct predictor of a tornado or anything on its own.
Still a sign to take cover.
Definitely a sign of a potent storm. You might also see yellowish clouds sometimes, usually due to pollution smoke from wildfires or nitrogen dioxide in cities.
And finally, beyond science and weather, humans have always had a relationship with clouds, haven't they? In culture, religion.
Absolutely, for millennia. You find clouds woven into mythology and belief systems everywhere. The ancient Akkadians saw clouds as the breasts of the sky goddess Antu. Rain was her milk.
Yeah.
In the Bible, you have Yahweh guiding the Israelites as a pillar of cloud and Jesus ascending into a cloud. In some traditions, clouds are celestial realms or beings, even in philosophy and literature. Aristophanes, the ancient Greek playwright, wrote a comedy called The Clouds, where they are portrayed as the only true deities, shifting shape, sources of inspiration.
So powerful
Very
symbols.
powerful. In China, clouds are traditional symbols of luck and happiness. Different patterns and colors represent multiplied blessings or eternal joy. And even today, think about just cloud watching, looking for shapes. That's a simple modern connection to that ancient sense of wonder, a form of pareidolia, seeing patterns and randomness.
It really is a universal thing. Wow, what a journey from, the basic physics of water droplets and ice crystals through that incredibly detailed classification system, their huge role in climate, both cooling and warming, and that big uncertainty, and right into mythology and art. You really do have a much deeper appreciation for clouds after all this. There's so much more than just background scenery.
Exactly. It shows how even the most familiar things we see every day, hold these incredible layers of complexity and meaning. Science, history, culture, it's all up there.
So
Yeah,
think
definitely.
about it. What really stood out to you from our deep dive today? Next time you look up, are you just going to see a cloud? Or are you going to see, I don't know, a cumulonimbus capillatus and Mauritius? Or maybe think about its albedo effect. Or just see a dragon.
And maybe something to mull over.
Yeah.
These clouds aren't static. They are a dynamic reflection of our atmosphere right now, but they're also profoundly shaping its future. And as we've discussed, they hold one of the biggest uncertainties in understanding climate change. What insights, what warnings or reassurances might we gain if we just paid a little closer attention to the ever-changing story they're telling above our heads? Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the information you give us, could be articles, notes, whatever, and really boil it down to what matters.
Yeah, we cut through the noise, pull out the key stuff, maybe find a few surprises along the way. We try to make complex topics genuinely understandable.
And today you've given us a deep dive on, well, a pretty heavy topic, poaching.
That's right. We're working from a Wikipedia excerpt you sent over, and our goal really is to unpack what this specific source tells us.
So what is poaching according to this? What's the definition, the history, the reasons behind it?
Exactly, and the effects it has, the products involved, and importantly, what's being done to try and stop it, all based purely on this material.
It definitely seems like a topic that pulls in history, economics, conservation,
Yeah,
a whole lot. Ready?
let's do it.
Okay, so right at the start, based on this source, what's the fundamental definition of poaching?
Well, the core is pretty clear. Illegal hunting or capturing of wild animals. But interestingly, the source immediately links it to land use rights.
Ah, okay. That makes sense with the historical context it gives, right? Like, it wasn't just random killing.
No, exactly. It was often, poorer people, peasants, taking game from lands where the nobility or rulers had claimed exclusive hunting rights. It was a fight over resources.
A clash over who gets to hunt where.
Precisely. But the definition's gotten broader. Since the 1980s, according to this material, it also covers illegally harvesting wild plants.
Plants too. Okay, didn't necessarily expect that. So it's expanded beyond just animals.
Yeah. And the source mentions a totally different use of poaching in agriculture, like livestock damaging land. But it's careful to say that's not what we're talking about here. Not theft like cattle raiding or anything.
Got it. So for this discussion, it's about illegally taking wild natural resources, plants or animals.
Right. And it's even tied into big global frameworks. The UN's Sustainable Development Goal 15 is mentioned, which specifically addresses tackling poaching and trafficking for sustainable wildlife use.
And there was a push by environmental scientists, wasn't there, back in '98, to frame it more as an environmental crime.
Yes, that's a key point here. They define it as an environmental crime that violates laws protecting renewable natural resources.
So it includes the illegal harvest, but also the intent, like possessing, transporting, selling, consuming, especially using body parts.
Exactly. And the source stresses this isn't just, a minor offense.
Yeah.
It sees poaching as one of the most serious threats out there to the actual survival of plant and animal populations.
Wow. So it's not just about the individual act, but the impact on biodiversity, on how whole ecosystems function. That's a big shift in perspective.
It really underlines the scale. And the material then dives into how this played out legally in different regions. It wasn't always seen the same way everywhere.
Like in continental Europe, it says that it wasn't just theft, but more like trespassing on hunting rights.
Yeah, exactly. A violation of someone else's domain. You can trace this history back from, like, old Germanic common hunting rights to Roman times in the Middle Ages, where rulers started restricting it.
And enforcement got tougher later on.
Definitely. From the 16th century onwards, hunting rights got tied directly to owning land. And then, technology played a part.
How so?
Well, in the 18th century, more people got access to rifles. That obviously made it easier for peasants to poach, which just intensified the clash with the nobility, who often used hunting as this big aristocratic display.
So it became a symbol, like challenging their power.
Very much so. The source mentions Bavaria in the 1830s and 40s, where poaching disputes actually led to deaths. It got serious.
And those revolutions in 1848, did that change things?
Well, there was some confusion. Some people apparently thought the revolutions meant poaching was okay now, but then the laws came back restricting hunting mostly to the wealthy landowners who could afford the licenses. Big disappointment for some.
That's maybe where the romantic image comes from. The bold poacher fighting the system.
Yeah, figures like Matthias Klostermaier, George Jennerwein. They became folk heroes in some areas. There were legends, songs about them.
But that changed over time. Local communities didn't always support them.
Right. The source mentions a case, Pius Walder, in the late 20th century. It suggests that while maybe city folks still held on to that romantic, rural idea, the actual local communities near the poaching often turned against it.
Interesting shift. Okay, what about the UK? Similar long history.
Just as long, yeah. The source even compares it to smuggling. And the word poach itself apparently comes from Middle English, meaning bagged or pouched, like putting something in a bag.
And under William the Conqueror, the consequences were pretty extreme.
Hanging. If commoners poached game reserved for the aristocracy under his forest laws, they could be hanged. Caused a lot of resentment, apparently.
But you still got the romantic figures like Robin Hood,
Right.
living off the land, the greenwood.
Exactly. There's that great story the source mentions. Robin Hood supposedly serves the king, Richard the Lionheart, venison he poached from the king's own forest, and the king just laughs and eats it.
Shows a certain acceptance back then, maybe.
Seems like it. There was even an old saying, non est inquirendum unde venison, basically don't ask where the venison came from.
But that changed too, with landowners getting stricter about property.
Yeah, things like the enclosure movements, the highland clearances. Landowners asserted modern property rights, and you got tougher laws in the 19th century, like the Night Poaching Act and the Game Act.
And across the Atlantic, in the U.S., could poaching disputes also turn violent?
Oh, definitely. The source points to things like the oyster wars in Chesapeake Bay, actual armed conflicts over oyster harvesting rights. And there were anti-poaching operations involving seals way up in the Bering Sea.
That Chesapeake example from the 30s sounds wild. Poachers using cannons on boats.
Yeah, swivel cannons mounted on flatboats to basically wipe out huge flocks of waterfowl. It shows just how intense and organized it could get.
So today in the U.S., what falls under wildlife crime or poaching? It sounds like a pretty broad list.
It really is. It covers the obvious stuff, like hunting endangered species protected under the Endangered Species Act, or migratory birds.
Right, or violating international agreements like SAITs.
Exactly, but it's also about how you hunt or fish. Things like doing it without a license, or outside the legal season, or hours especially during breeding seasons, which is a big one.
And methods matter too.
Hugely. Using stuff like machine guns, poison, explosives, snare traps, nets, pitfall traps. All generally illegal. Even using the wrong kind of weapon or firepower for the game.
What else? Baiting. Hunting from cars.
Prohibited baiting, yeah. Hunting from vehicles or aircraft, even scouting for game from the air. Spotlighting, using a light to freeze an animal that's illegal in many states and seen as animal abuse.
Okay. And things like trespassing. Taking tagged research animals.
Yep. Trespassing on restricted land to take wildlife, taking tag animals, targeting females or young animals specifically, or just going over your bag limit. Lots of regulations.
Now, the source brings up a really important, sensitive point here about the term poaching itself.
Yes, it does. It points out that the term can be used, sometimes controversially, to criminalize traditional ways of life.
How so?
Specifically, the subsistence hunting techniques of indigenous peoples on their ancestral lands, especially if those lands get designated as wildlife reserves, maybe more for tourists than locals.
It mentions the Central Kalahari Game Reserve as an example of that tension.
Right. It adds this really crucial layer that legal definitions and conservation goals can sometimes clash with deep-rooted cultural practices and historical rights, especially in places with a colonial past.
Definitely adds complexity.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears. We know what it is, legally and historically, but why do people do it? The motives seem all over the place.
They really are. The source mentions research, particularly from North America, identifying a bunch of reasons.
Like what? Money? Food?
Yeah, commercial gain is a big one. Hunting just for food, for your own family home consumption, getting trophies. Some people apparently just do it for the thrill, the excitement.
And some just don't like the rules.
Right. Disagreeing with regulations, maybe feeling they have a traditional right to hunt regardless of the law, or just having a generally negative view of authority figures like game wardens.
But poverty seems like a really major thread running through this.
Absolutely. It comes up again and again. The source gives examples from rural Louisiana people poaching for food, because it's part of their culture, sure, but also to make money selling the meat, or, yeah, sometimes for the thrill, too.
And in rural Africa, similar drivers.
Very similar, often driven by poverty, where there aren't many other jobs or good farming options. People rely on natural resources. Bushmeat fetches high prices in cities, so there's a cash incentive.
And the demand for body parts, too.
Yeah.
For traditional uses.
Yes, for traditional medicine or ceremonies, that's another driver.
And then there's the organized crime element. This isn't just individuals, is it?
No, not always. The international demand, especially for high-value products, fuels organized crime. You get gangs operating in areas with vulnerable wildlife populations and complex trafficking networks run by syndicates moving these parts globally.
Even conflict can play a role.
Yeah, the source notes that armed conflict in Africa can disrupt normal life, destroy livelihoods, and push people towards poaching as a way to find food or income when other options disappear.
There was a survey mentioned in Tanzania. What did that find?
It found the main reasons were getting bushmeat for food and for sale. People were more likely to eat bushmeat if they didn't have other protein sources easily available.
Did location matter?
Yes. People living further from a reserve were less likely to poach. And timing mattered too. More poaching happened before the harvest season, maybe when food stores were low, and during heavy rains, which would wash away tracks and make it harder to get caught.
And poverty driving poaching in Asia, too.
The source mentions anecdotal accounts from Thailand people saying they took the risks because they wanted a better life for their kids, a desperation motive.
But it's not only poverty, right? There's a huge cultural demand aspect, especially in Asia.
Definitely. Wildlife products are often status symbols. Think ivory in China. The source links increased demand partly to the economic boom, giving more people the money to buy historically rare, prestigious items.
And for tigers in China, it's deeply cultural.
Yeah, the source calls it a major challenge. Beliefs about tiger parts being status symbols or having these, mysterious medicinal powers that keeps the illegal trade going strong despite laws and conservation work.
So it's this messy mix, economic desperation, cultural tradition, status-seeking, and global criminal networks.
A very complex web of motives.
And the consequences?
Yeah.
The effects of all this poaching? They sound pretty devastating. Ecologically, the source talks about defaunation. What does that mean?
It basically means emptying the forests of animals. When you take out predators, herbivores, animals that eat fruit and spread seeds faster than they can reproduce, it changes everything.
How does it change the forest itself?
Well, if the animals that spread certain seeds are gone, those plants might disappear locally. The source mentions large seeded trees might start to dominate because the animals that ate their seeds are gone, while plants with smaller seeds, maybe spread by different animals, decline. It shifts the whole balance.
And obviously, it reduces animal numbers, maybe even drives them extinct.
Absolutely. And it also makes protected areas less effective because poachers often work around the edges, effectively shrinking the safe zone.
Beyond the environment, there are economic impacts, too.
Yeah. Poaching is bad news for wildlife tourism. Negative publicity, fewer animals to see, that means less income, fewer jobs for guides, lodges, local communities that depend on that tourism money.
Okay, but maybe the most alarming effect mentioned in this material is the link to human health. Zoonotic diseases.
This is huge. The source explicitly links poaching activities to the emergence of diseases that jump from animals to humans.
Like Ebola.
Yes, it mentions Ebola outbreaks in the Congo Basin and Gabon being linked to handling and eating infected ape meat, likely obtained through hunting.
And SARS.
The SARS outbreak that started in Hong Kong was traced to people handling or eating small carnivores, civets, raccoon dogs, that kind of thing, sold in wildlife markets in southern China. Markets often supplied by illegal hunting.
Wow. Any others mentioned?
Yeah, bushmeat hunters in Central Africa being exposed to primates carrying the human T lymphotropic virus,
Ah,
and finding that wild chimps in Cameroon carry a virus, the simian foamy virus, that's considered a precursor to HIV-1.
so the illegal wildlife trade isn't just about saving animals. It's a direct threat to public health, potentially even sparking pandemics.
That's the stark warning here. It makes the issue feel incredibly urgent, doesn't it?
It really does. So what are the actual products? What's being poached and traded?
A lot of it, according to this source, is driven by traditional beliefs, mostly in Asia, especially Vietnam and China. Things like tiger parts, rhino horns.
Believed to do what? Cure diseases.
Yeah, things like increasing virility, curing cancer. The source calls these beliefs pseudoscientific, but they drive a massive black market demand.
Is traditional Chinese medicine specifically mentioned?
Yes, it's noted that TCM often uses parts from endangered species, seahorses, rhino horns, pangolin scales are mentioned, along with tiger bones and claws. That demand creates the black market.
And for tigers, even with laws against it, the trade continues.
Apparently so. The cultural belief in tiger parts as status symbols or medicine is so ingrained that the source says you can still find them being displayed or sold in markets. Popular parts mentioned are genitals, believed to boost virility, and eyes.
And rhinos.
Oh.
They're facing extinction because of this demand.
Largely, yes. Demand in Asia for medicine and luxury goods, but also in the Middle East for things like traditional dagger handles.
Vietnam comes up again.
Yeah, there was a huge surge in demand. They're reportedly linked to a rumor with no scientific basis that rhino horn could cure cancer.
And the price, just astronomical.
Insane. $60,000 a kilogram back in 2012, the source says. More valuable than gold at that time. It even mentions Vietnam mass-producing special bowls just for grinding the horn.
Wow. Then there's ivory, mostly from elephants.
Primarily, yes, though other animals have ivory. Used for art, jewelry. China is highlighted as a massive consumer. Something like 70% of the illegal ivory was flowing there around 2012.
And fur. Is that mentioned?
Yeah, on a more niche, regional level. It mentions the gamsbart, a tuft of hair from a chamois back, like a beard worn traditionally on hats in parts of Austria and Bavaria. It's a hunting trophy, but can also be obtained through poaching.
So it's a real mix of things. Body parts for questionable medicine, status symbols like ivory, even traditional cultural items.
Driven by a complex set of demands.
Okay, so given all this, what's being done? How are people fighting back against poaching?
Well, the source suggests that just creating more parks might not be enough. Targeted anti-poaching efforts seem potentially more effective.
What kinds of efforts are happening in Africa?
There are groups like Traffic, which work to map poaching hotspots and trafficking routes, trying to disrupt the smugglers, especially those moving ivory to Asia.
And the scale of the elephant problem is just dark. 35,000 a year killed for tusks.
It's a staggering number. So you see different tactics emerging, like the Rhino Rescue Project.
What do they do?
They inject rhino horns with a mixture of dye and a parasiticide. It's harmless to the rhino because the horn is keratin, like fingernails, but it makes the horn unusable for consumption or display, and the dye can help track it if it's seized.
Clever. And technology is playing a role too. DNA.
Yeah, there's a database called Rhodys Rhino DNA Index System. They collect DNA from horns that are confiscated or from poaching sites and build a database to help link horns to specific locations or even track poachers across different crime scenes.
Are there specific organizations mentioned?
Yeah, Africa's Wildlife Trust working on elephant protection in Tanzania, and groups taking a more direct paramilitary approach.
Like the International Anti-Poaching Foundation, using military tactics, drones.
Exactly. Using battlefield strategies, tech like UAVs, drones to monitor large areas and respond quickly.
But that approach gets criticized too, doesn't it?
It does. The source notes concerns that it can be heavy-handed, maybe doesn't address the root causes like poverty or the global demand, and could potentially lead to unjust or coercive situations on the ground.
So other approaches focus more on training local teams or awareness.
Right. Groups like Shinjeta Wildlife train local protection teams and also lobby governments. And individuals like Jim Nyamu in Kenya doing these long elephant walks to raise public awareness about the ivory crisis.
Then there are the really controversial government policies.
Yes. The material mentions a Tanzanian minister in 2013 urging police to shoot poachers on sight. Namibia authorizing police to return fire if shot at in 2016.
And Botswana's shoot-to-kill policy.
Adopted in 2013. According to this source, it led to poaching becoming virtually non-existent there, which has prompted debate about whether other countries should do the same.
Very controversial. And Kenya considered the death penalty.
Announced in 2018, yeah. The government argued fines and jail time just weren't deterring poachers enough. Huge debate around that, human rights groups opposing, conservationists supporting. The source indicated Kenya was moving towards implementing it as of early 2019, shows the extreme measures being considered.
Wow. Okay, switching to Asia, what's being done there?
Well, some symbolic actions, like just destroying big stockpiles of confiscated ivory. The Philippines did it in 2013. China crushed 6 tons in 2014. Big public statements.
Are there different schools of thought on solutions? Supply versus demand?
Yeah, some focus on the supply side, better law enforcement, stronger policies, but also involving local communities, maybe giving them more rights over land and resources.
But tackling demand is seen as vital too.
Yeah.
Because of that snob effect.
Exactly. The idea that if a product gets rarer and more expensive due to anti-poaching efforts, it might just become more desirable for wealthy elites, which kind of defeats the purpose. So reducing the actual desire for the product is seen as really important.
Does the source say if demand reduction works?
It suggests there's evidence it might be more effective than just more policing, but it also notes that the impact of these kinds of interventions isn't always rigorously evaluated, so more research needed there.
And for animals like tigers, it needs a really coordinated approach.
Definitely. The source mentions working with agencies that fight organized crime, raising public awareness, better protection on the ground, targeted ad campaigns sometimes using pretty graphic imagery, and getting celebrities like Jackie Chan involved as spokespeople.
It all sounds incredibly complex, no easy answers.
Not at all. The source emphasizes that traditional ways of fighting poaching often miss the bigger picture, the poverty, the organized crime links, the global demand. It really needs everyone working together, public, conservation groups, police, governments.
And lastly, in the U.S., any specific tactics mentioned?
Yeah, technology again. Game wardens using robotic decoys, realistic fake animals, sometimes even moving to trick poachers into revealing themselves so they can be arrested.
Like a sting operation with a robot deer.
Pretty much. And for protecting marine areas, there's mention of a radar system called Marine Monitor to watch for illegal boats.
So from high-tech surveillance and DNA databases to controversial enforcement policies, public awareness campaigns, and trying to change deep-seated cultural beliefs. It's a huge range of efforts.
A real spectrum of approaches trying to tackle this multifaceted problem.
Okay, well, that was definitely a deep dive into this Wikipedia material on poaching. We've really covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, from tracing its roots back to historical land disputes.
Seeing how the definition expanded and how it's now viewed as a serious environmental crime.
Exploring the different legal histories in Europe, the UK, the US, and that critical issue around indigenous rights.
Unpacking all those different reasons why people poach from sheer survival to organized crime and cultural status.
And looking at the ripple effects, the damage to ecosystems, the economic costs, and that really alarming link to human health and disease outbreaks.
Plus, we identified the key products driving the trade, like rhino horn and ivory, often linked to pseudoscientific beliefs.
And finally, surveyed that whole landscape of counter-poaching efforts, from tech and community engagement to those really tough, controversial enforcement policies and attempts to reduce demand.
And it's important to stress again, this is all based purely on the information within that Wikipedia excerpt you provided for us to analyze.
Absolutely. That was our source material for this dive.
So to leave you, our listener, with something to think about, here's a final thought. We've seen that poaching stems from everything from desperate poverty and subsistence needs right through to vast international criminal networks and deep cultural demands. The impacts range from localized ecological damage to potentially global health crises.
So the question is, how do we even begin to create solutions that actually work, that are effective in stopping the illegal killing and trade, but are also fair and just? How do we make them equitable across all these vastly different situations, cultures, and motivations around the world?
Definitely something to chew on. Have you ever really stopped to think about blood? I mean, not just when you get a paper cut, but what it actually is. It's this living fluid, coursing through our bodies every single second, and yet we often take its complexity, it's astonishing complexity, completely for granted. But what if I told you that something so seemingly simple, so fundamental, is actually this universe of incredible design, a silent partner in every breath you take?
It really is quite remarkable. Blood is, well, undeniably one of the most vital, most intricate parts of our biology. It performs this huge array of tasks that are just absolutely essential for life.
And that's exactly our mission today. Welcome to a deep dive into the world of blood. We're going to unpack some fascinating facts, some surprising insights about this incredible fluid. We want to cut through the noise and really bring you the most important nuggets of knowledge. You're about to gain a whole new appreciation, I think, for the very stuff of life. So let's start with what maybe seems like a simple question. What is blood?
We know it's the body fluid in the circulatory system, right? In humans, other vertebrates, its main job is delivering essentials nutrients, oxygen, to our cells. And just as importantly, transporting metabolic waste products away. But there's a surprising twist right off the bat, isn't there?
There is, yeah. While it flows like a liquid, anatomically speaking, blood is actually considered a specialized form of connective tissue.
Connective tissue. That sounds a bit counterintuitive for a liquid.
It does, but think about its origin. It comes from deep within the bone marrow, and it has these potential molecular fibers like fibrinogen, which you need for clotting. So it makes more sense when you look at it that way. It's like a fluid tissue. A fluid tissue. I like that. Okay, so if we break down this fluid tissue, what are its main components?
Right. Blood is primarily made up of two major parts. You've got blood cells and you've got blood plasma. Plasma is the liquid part, that clear sort of straw yellow fluid. It makes up about 55% of your blood volume.
55%. Good.
Yeah, and it's mostly water, about 92%, but the other 8% is packed with crucial stuff. Proteins, glucose, mineral ions, hormones, even dissolved gases. Think of plasma as the body's superhighway. It circulates all those dissolved nutrients, and it ferries waste products like carbon dioxide and urea away for removal. Oh, and if you take the clotting proteins out of plasma, what's left is called serum.
Got it. So plasma is the highway, and then we have the formed elements, the blood cells. What are these tiny passengers doing?
Exactly, the passengers. So in mammals, we have three main types, each with a critical role. First, and the most abundant by far, are the red blood cells, erythrocytes. These are your primary oxygen carriers.
The oxygen taxes.
Pretty much. They contain hemoglobin, that special protein that binds reversibly to oxygen, picks it up in the lungs, drops it off in the tissues. About 98.5% of the oxygen in your arterial blood travels this way. And what's really fascinating, mature mammalian red blood cells actually, they lack a nucleus.
No nucleus. That's odd for a cell.
It is unique. It makes them more flexible, gives them more space for hemoglobin. They also define your blood type, A, B, O, A, B. And get this, the total surface area of all your red blood cells combined is roughly 2,000 times greater than your body's outer surface. Huge area.
Wow, 2,000 times like 2 football fields you mentioned.
Something like that, yeah. And the proportion of blood volume they take up is called the hematocrit, normally around 45%. It's a measure of sort of how thick your blood is with these oxygen carriers.
Okay, so red cells for oxygen. What's next?
Second, we have white blood cells, or leukocytes. Think of these as your body's internal security force.
The defender.
Exactly. They're constantly patrolling, destroying old or faulty cells, cleaning up debris, attacking pathogens, bacteria, viruses, you name it. When this system goes wrong, when you get too many faulty white cells, that's leukemia, a type of blood cancer.
Right. And the third type?
Finally, we have platelets, also called thrombocytes. These are tiny cell fragments, really. They're the body's rapid response repair crew, absolutely crucial for blood clotting or coagulation.
Clotting, yeah. How do they do that?
Well, when a blood vessel gets damaged, platelets rush to the site and stick together, forming a plug. Then, a protein called fibrin forms this kind of mesh over the platelet plug, making a stable clot to stop the bleeding. It's incredibly fast and efficient.
That's a really clear picture for mammals. And you mentioned there are differences in, say, birds or reptiles.
Yeah, just briefly, non-mammalian vertebrates often have red blood cells that keep their nuclei. They're also usually flattened and ovoid. And instead of platelets, they have nucleated cells called thrombocytes that handle clotting. Similar function, slightly different structure.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. Beyond just carrying oxygen and looking red, what else does blood do? Because it feels like there's a lot happening behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. Blood isn't just transport. Think of it as the body's multitasker. Emergency service, climate control, even a hydraulic system sometimes.
Hydraulic system. Tell me more about that.
Well, we already mentioned oxygen and nutrient supply, waste removal, crucial. But it's also central to our immune functions, circulating those white blood cells and antibodies. And coagulation, obviously, that rapid response to stop bleeding.
Okay, got those.
With
Nice.
messenger functions, it transports hormones from glands to target tissues all over the body. It's like a chemical communication network. It also signals tissue damage, alerting the immune system, and temperature regulation, huge role there, transporting heat. Blood flow adjusts to the skin surface to release or conserve heat.
Right, keeping us warm or cooling us down.
Exactly. And then the hydraulic function. Think about engorgement in certain tissues, like the penis or clitoris that's caused by changes in blood flow. Or, an amazing example from nature, the jumping spider. It doesn't use big leg muscles to jump.
No. How does it jump then?
It forces blood into its legs under pressure. That sudden pressure straightens the legs, creating a powerful leap. It's pure fluid dynamics.
Wow, a spider using blood pressure to jump. That really changes how you think about movement. Are there other examples like that?
Well, that spider's pretty extreme. In our bodies, it's more subtle. Blood pressure helps maintain the turgor, the sort of rigidity in soft tissues. Less about big movements, more about maintaining shape and structural integrity. But yeah, the jumping spider really highlights the principle.
That's fascinating. Okay, so this incredibly complex fluid doing all these jobs, how does it actually get around? How is this whole circulation managed so perfectly?
It is an amazing system. It's all driven by the heart, the body's relentless pump. So blood gets pumped from the strong left ventricle through the arteries, carrying oxygenated blood out to all the body tissues.
Arteries carry blood away from the heart.
Right. Then it returns to the right atrium of the heart through the veins, now mostly deoxygenated. From the right atrium, it goes to the right ventricle. Then it's pumped through the pulmonary artery to the lungs.
To pick up more oxygen.
Exactly. In the lungs, it gets reoxygenated, then returns to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins, and finally back into the left ventricle to start the cycle all over again. The key thing to remember, the exception, is the pulmonary circuit. Pulmonary arteries carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood back to the heart, opposite of the rest of the body.
Ah, okay, that's an important distinction. And this whole idea of circulation, wasn't that a relatively late discovery?
It was, yeah. William Harvey first described this continuous circulation back in 1628. Before that, ideas were quite different, a truly groundbreaking discovery.
So the heart's the pump. But what about the cells themselves? Where are they made? How are they managed? And what happens when they wear out?
Good question. All the blood cells are produced in the bone marrow. The process is called hematopoiesis, literally blood making. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, they all start there. Erythropoiesis for red cells, myelopoiesis for others.
All in the bone marrow.
Primarily. In kids, almost all bones do it. In adults, it's mainly the larger bones, vertebrae, sternum, ribs, pelvis, upper parts of arm and leg bones. The protein components of blood, though, like clotting factors, are mostly made by the liver. And the kidneys are vital, too. They filter waste out into the urine. As for breaking down old cells, red blood cells live about 120 days. Then they're removed by the spleen and special immune cells called Kupffer cells in the liver.
120 days. Okay, so let's go back to oxygen and carbon dioxide transport.
Yeah.
You mentioned hemoglobin is key for oxygen. How efficient is it really? And how does the CO2 get handled?
Hemoglobin is incredibly efficient. It boosts the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity about 70-fold compared to just dissolving oxygen in plasma.
70 times.
Yeah, huge difference. When blood leaves the lungs, hemoglobin is normally 98–99% saturated with oxygen, ready to go. Even when it returns to the lungs at rest, it's still about 75% saturated. So tissues typically extract about a quarter of the oxygen load per cycle. And fetal hemoglobin is even better adapted. It has a higher affinity for oxygen, which is crucial for grabbing enough oxygen from the mother's blood at lower pressures in the womb.
Perfectly designed for the job.
Right.
What about the waste gas, CO2?
CO2 is handled in three main ways. Most of it, about 70%, gets converted into bicarbonate ions. This happens inside the red blood cells using an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase.
Okay, 70% is bicarbonate.
Right. Then about 7% is just dissolved directly in the plasma. And the remaining 23% or so actually binds to hemoglobin, forming carbamino compounds. And this is neat, it binds at a different site than oxygen does.
It's a different binding site, so they don't compete directly.
Exactly. And this leads to a really elegant interplay. When oxygen binds to hemoglobin in the lungs, it actually helps push CO2 off hemoglobin. That's called the Haldane effect. Conversely, in the tissues where CO2 levels are high, that helps oxygen get released from hemoglobin where it's needed. That's related to the Bohr effect. It's this constant dynamic exchange. Oh, and hemoglobin also helps buffer the blood by binding hydrogen ions, especially when it's not carrying oxygen.
Wow, a built-in negotiation system. It's incredibly sophisticated. And speaking of balance, what about blood's role in the wider body, beyond just transport, like pH?
Absolutely critical. Blood pH has to stay within an extremely narrow range, 7.35 to 7.45, slightly alkaline or basic.
That narrow. What happens if it goes outside that?
It's usually lethal. A pH below 6.9 or above 7.8 generally isn't compatible with life. It's that tightly regulated. The respiratory system, by controlling CO2 levels, in the urinary system, by excreting acids or bases, work together constantly to maintain this acid-base balance.
And its connection to the lymphatic system.
Yeah, they're closely linked. Lymph fluid is basically filtered blood plasma that leaks out of capillaries into the tissues. This lymph is collected by lymphatic vessels and eventually returned to the bloodstream via the thoracic duct. It's like a parallel drainage and immune surveillance system.
And does blood flow equally everywhere?
Not at all. It varies hugely depending on the organ's needs. The liver gets the largest total blood supply overall. But if you look at flow per gram of tissue, the kidneys, adrenal glands, and thyroid gland have incredibly high flow rates, reflecting their high metabolic activity.
Okay, so we've painted a picture of blood working perfectly, but inevitably things can go wrong. What happens when the system faces challenges, and how do we intervene?
Right. Unfortunately, there's a whole range of blood disorders. We can group them, sort of. First, disorders of volume. Bleeding, obviously, reduces volume. A healthy adult can lose almost 20% of their blood volume before symptoms really start, but losing 40% typically leads to shock.
Shock being lack of blood flow to tissues.
Exactly. Ineffective tissue perfusion. Dehydration also messes with volume by reducing the water content, making blood thicker, harder to circulate.
Okay, volume issues. What else?
Disorders of circulation itself. Shock is one example. Atherosclerosis, narrowing of arteries by plaque, restricts flow. That can cause hypoxia, lack of oxygen, or ischemia, inadequate blood supply. If flow is totally blocked, you get infarction tissue death, like in a heart attack or stroke. And thrombosis, blood clots forming where they shouldn't, can obstruct vessels with similar consequences.
Nasty stuff. What about problems with the blood cells themselves?
Those are hematological disorders. Anemia is a big one, not enough red cell mass, so the blood can't carry enough oxygen. It can be caused by bleeding, nutritional issues like iron deficiency, or genetic disorders like thalassemia, which affects hemoglobin production, or sickle cell anemia.
Sickle cell, where the cells are the wrong shape.
Right, they become crescent-shaped, rigid, can't carry oxygen well, and block small vessels. Anemia is generally diagnosed by low hemoglobin levels. Then there's leukemia, cancers of the blood-forming tissues, usually involving overproduction of abnormal white cells. You can also have overproduction of other cells, like red cells in polycythemia vera, or platelets in essential thrombocytosis.
And clotting problems.
Yep, disorders of coagulation. Hemophilia is a famous genetic one where clotting is dysfunctional, leading to easy bruising and dangerous bleeding, especially into joints. You can also have problems with platelets being ineffective or too few. Or the opposite problem, hypercoagulable states, thrombophilia, where you're too prone to forming dangerous clots.
Seems like a delicate balance. Can infections travel in blood too?
Definitely. Blood is a major vector. Viruses like HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, bacteria causing bacteremia or sepsis, which is a life-threatening systemic infection, parasites like malaria.
You mentioned carbon monoxide poisoning earlier.
Yes, that's a specific transport problem. CO binds to hemoglobin much more strongly than oxygen does, and it's basically irreversible. It forms carboxyhemoglobin, which can't carry oxygen. So the person essentially suffocates from lack of oxygen delivery, even if they're breathing. That's why things like faulty heaters or fires in enclosed spaces are so dangerous. Tobacco smoke also contains CO.
That's a sobering list of potential problems.
Yeah.
So how do we fight back? What are the medical interventions?
Well, one of the most vital is blood transfusion. Using blood collected from healthy donors, stored in blood banks. Compatibility is absolutely critical here. Matching ADO and rhesus blood groups is essential. Cross-matching is always done to prevent severe reactions.
You can't just give any blood to anyone.
Absolutely not. It can be fatal. Besides whole blood, we can also transfuse specific components like packed red cells, platelets, plasma, or clotting factor concentrates, depending on the patient's need.
And giving medicines directly into the blood.
Right, intravenous or IV administration. Many drugs, like antibiotics or chemotherapy, are given this way because they work faster or aren't absorbed well if taken orally. For severe acute blood loss, doctors often use plasma expanders for basically salt solutions or special colloidal solutions given intravenously. They rapidly restore blood volume, which can be more immediately life-saving than waiting for transfused red cells to fully start working.
That makes sense, volume first. What about bloodletting? You hear about that historically.
Ah, bloodletting. It's very rarely used in modern medicine, only for a few specific conditions like hemochromatosis, where the body stores too much iron, or sometimes polycythemia, too many red cells, but historically. Until the 19th century, it was incredibly common, based on the old Greek humorism idea that diseases were caused by an imbalance, often an excess, of blood. Leeches were used too. It's a stark reminder of how much medical understanding has advanced. We now know it was usually harmful.
Definitely highlights the contrast. So we covered biology, disorders, treatments.
Hmm.
But blood is clearly more than just plumbing in cells, isn't it? It seems deeply embedded in our culture, our history, our language.
Oh, absolutely. It resonates on so many levels. Let's start with something basic. Its color. Hemoglobin is the key. Oxygenated blood in arteries and capillaries is that bright, vibrant red. Deoxygenated blood, like in veins or when you donate, is a much darker maroon red.
So it's not actually blue in the veins.
No, that's a common myth. Veins look blue through the skin because of how light scatters and is absorbed by the skin and blood, but the blood itself isn't blue. Interestingly, some things do change its color. Carbon monoxide poisoning makes blood abnormally bright red. Cyanide poisoning can make venous blood stay redder than usual, and very rarely you can get conditions that make blood look greenish or chocolate brown due to abnormal hemoglobin forms. Some lizards, certain skinks, even naturally have green blood due to high levels of biliverdin, a bile pigment.
Green blood. Wild.
Yeah.
What about the word blood itself?
It's interesting. The English word blood has clear Germanic roots, but linguists haven't definitively traced it back to a common Proto-Indo-European origin. It suggests it's a very ancient core concept.
And historically, how did ancient cultures view it before Harvey?
Well, the Greek humorism system, black bile, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, might actually have come from watching blood settle after collection. You get the dark clot, black bile, the red cells, blood, a whitish layer of white cells, phlegm, and the clear yellow serum, yellow bile. It's a plausible origin. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle believed blood was made from food. Plato imagined fire in the belly did it. Aristotle thought the heart concocted it.
A long way from understanding bone marrow.
A very long way. The scientific understanding of blood types for safe transfusions only came in the 20th century. Karl Landsteiner, 1900, discovered the ABO groups. Jan Jansky classified the four main types we use today, A, B, ABO, in 1907. First ABO matched transfusion was also in 1907, and the rhesus Rh factor wasn't found until 1937, relatively recent history.
It really is. And culturally, blood seems almost universal as a symbol.
Absolutely. It's fundamental. Think about family. Related by blood, bloodlines. Blood is thicker than water. It signifies kinship, heritage, but also conflict, bad blood, and deep bonds, blood brothers. Religiously, it's hugely significant across many faiths, often seen as the seat of life itself, based on passages like Leviticus. The life of a creature is in the blood.
Which leads to prohibitions on consuming it.
Exactly. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, consuming blood is generally prohibited, leading to practices like koshering meat in Judaism to remove as much blood as possible. It's about reverence for life.
Are there other interesting cultural or religious connections?
Oh, loads. Indigenous Australians use red ochre and sometimes blood in rituals, linking it to the dream time and the Earth's energies, possibly connecting to iron's magnetic properties. In old European paganism, the Germanic blots involve sprinkling animal blood for blessings. The Old English word bludgeon, meaning to sprinkle with blood, is the root of our word to bless.
Wow, bless comes from blood sprinkling.
Seems likely. The ancient Hittite word for blood, ishar, was related to their words for oath and bond. Blood oaths were serious business. The Greeks had ichor, the golden blood of the gods, poisonous to mortals. And there was even an old ordeal called cruentation, where a corpse was supposed to bleed if the murderer was near, used in trials.
That's quite dark. What about major world religions today?
In Christianity, Christ's blood is central to atonement and salvation for many believers. The Eucharist, or communion, involves wine that represents, or for some denominations becomes, his blood. In Islam, consuming blood is forbidden by the Quran. Specific slaughter methods ensure maximum blood drainage from meat. There are also rules about ritual purity related to bleeding. Judaism has very strict rules. The koshering process is meticulous, even checking eggs for blood spots. And Jehovah's Witnesses famously interpret biblical passages to mean they must refuse transfusions of whole blood or its major components, though their stance on smaller fractions is more nuanced now.
And you can't talk about blood without mentioning vampires.
Right. The mythology is pervasive. Creatures drinking blood for sustenance, like Dracula or Nosferatu legends found worldwide. It taps into that deep connection between blood and life force. Very different from real blood feeders like ticks or vampire bats, of course, but a powerful archetype.
So beyond the symbolic, blood leaves literal traces too, right? In forensics, art.
Definitely. Forensic science relies heavily on blood. Bloodstain pattern analysis can reconstruct crime scenes. DNA from blood-linked suspects, blood residue on ancient tools tells archaeologists about their use. And in art, some artists have used actual blood. Herman Nitsch in his performances, or Mark Quinn's self-portraits made from his own frozen blood, quite provocative uses. And finally, genealogy is steeped in blood language. Bloodline, royal blood, blue blood, mixed blood. It's intrinsically linked to our sense of identity and ancestry.
What an incredible journey we've taken. This deep dive, it really has shown blood to be so much more than just, a biological fluid. It's incredibly complex, life-sustaining system, yes, but it's also just profoundly woven into our history, our culture, our deepest beliefs. Those aha moments, understanding all its functions, and then seeing its symbolic weight. They really do hit home, don't they?
They absolutely do. It makes you realize how something so sort of microscopic and commonplace flowing inside us constantly holds such immense power, not just scientifically, but culturally, existentially. It really is a potent reminder of our shared humanity, our connection, and maybe our vulnerability too.
So maybe the next time you hear a phrase like blood relative or see a discussion about blood types, just pause for a second. Think about the incredible depth, the layers of meaning that this humble fluid carries, both inside us and within our cultures. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other fundamental elements of our lives might hold such surprising rich histories and meanings that we just tend to overlook every day?